So the British Grand Prix looked like it was going to be a bit of a snooze fest at one point. I saw a lot of people on Twitter poking at it, going, something happened. And the F1 gods delivered with something that was a little bit circa 2013 Pirelli Tiregate, with a few exploding tyres on the final laps of the Grand Prix, and saw Lewis Hamilton limp to his 7th British Grand Prix victory, with an ever-closing Max Verstappen on his tail to come in second. Now, Alex, this was your first on-the-ground Grand Prix after the pause of Australia. How was it for your first one?
Well, I mean, the actual majority of the race was pretty dull, but the actual event, absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it is very difficult with all the restrictions on the media at the moment, but it was just immense for me personally to be there. Really enjoyed myself. And yeah, the last 3 laps, I was actually at that Grand Prix, that British Grand Prix in 2013. So it was very reminiscent with that. Did have to completely redo the intro for my Autosport.com race report, but needs must. We got there, finished work at 5 a.m. this morning for all the magazine stuff. So yeah, hopefully I don't say anything too mad in this recording, but we'll see how we go. Yeah, a great event from my point of view. And yeah, another one on the horizon next weekend.
Alex, all I'm hearing are excuses right now because we're going to dive straight into the driver rankings. So let's kick off with the Haas boys, Romain Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen. Now, Kevin Magnussen's race didn't last very long at all, and he was off into the gravel pretty early on in the race. But you've given him a 7 out of 10, Alex. Kind of hard to judge, really, isn't it?
It is. We're gonna see this a lot in this episode because of so many early incidents, and in one case, a driver not even starting the race. But yeah, I thought Magnussen was strong in qualifying, put the car exactly where it needed to be, made a very good race start. Okay, yeah, benefited from Hülkenberg not being on the grids. But yeah, it's sort of I actually called it as a racing incident between Albon and Magnussen. I know that the stewards gave Albon the penalty, but I think both of them share blame. But yeah, the reason why he gets 7 and is ahead of Grosjean is because of that strong qualifying performance. Grosjean was pretty slow in qualifying. He was put on a curious strategy by Haas by leaving him out. He was on a bit of hiding to nothing, and then not being able to get going again at the pit stop. That was really costly. Don't know if there was a car problem there, but if it was driver error, that's another fault of Grosjean. And also his defending, pretty outrageous. You got to say, particularly for a director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. That next meeting might be a bit spicy. But yeah, so 6 for Grosjean, 7 for Magnussen.
So a 6 and a 7. Probably fair. Yeah, not again. Just a pretty hard showing for Haas. They've not really been anywhere this season yet. So let's hope that they have a better round at Silverstone this weekend. Alfa Romeo, another driver that had a bit of a messy race or messy weekend really was Giovinazzi, who had a couple of penalties for speeding behind the safety car. Also had a spin in FP1. And although he had a pretty strong start, I think he made up a lot of places right off the bat, which was great to see. But yeah, just a bit meh, really.
He did make up a lot of places, but there were 3 cars that were just taken out of the equation in front of him in terms of Magnussen obviously punted out of the race, Albon eventually pits, and then Hülkenberg never starts. So I think he did make a good start, fair play, but yeah, it's also artificially boosted at the same time. But yeah, a lot of errors in this one. Also, he was strong. He finished ahead of Russell on the road. We know the Williams is slower than the Alfa Romeo. There's not a lot in it, but ultimately that car, the Williams, isn't just quite as good. And then that penalty, driving too fast under the safety car, cost him a position to a slower car. So yeah, 5 for Giovinazzi. And then coming on to Raikkonen, this was again a disappointing weekend. There's some amazing clips I know of him coming into the pits and berating the team for calling him in too late. There's actually going on to one of his stop later on after his front wing breaks. There's the Alfa Romeo team is giving him some really confusing instructions when he's in the pit box. So yeah, there's all sorts of things going on at that team. But Raikkonen, easily beaten by his teammate in qualifying, was well adrift of the Williams drivers. Latifi went around him. So yeah, pretty slow. And then actually the front wing, he says it's the front wing failure. Well, Kimi, you ran over the curbs at Copse and broke it. So you're going to have to take that one there. So 5 for Kimi, I think.
Wasn't he saying on the radio as well, I don't know what's wrong. It's well, if you leave the track and hit a ton of stuff on your car, the car's going to break. They're not built like rally cars. It's back to his rally days. Moving on to the Williams boys. Again, their race pace just doesn't seem to be there, which we know. But Mr. Saturday turned up again, put in an absolute stellar lap, I thought, in Q1 to get through to Q2 again, which is really good to see the Williams consistently getting into Q2. But that yellow. So there was a lot of chat on, again on Twitter and in the media about why he was given a 5-place penalty rather than a 3-place penalty, which is what Norris and Hamilton received in previous Grand Prix. But it's to do with the fact that it was a double waved yellow, right? So it's a stronger message that the drivers have to adhere stricter restrictions, and there's a set penalty that if you ignore a double yellow, it's 5 places and that's it. But he seemed pretty adamant that he was in control of the car and he slowed down, but that wasn't found to be the case, was it?
Yeah, sadly, it's pretty slam dunk for George because he sort of ticked all the boxes of what you got to do to get a penalty by passing that double yellow flag. Just very quickly, Jess, on the race pace, Williams actually really pleased with their race pace because they beat an Alfa on merit in Raikkonen, and I've got another one with Giovinazzi, and they were helped out with Grosjean's mad strategy. But yeah, Russell again, great in qualifying, good in the race, I thought. But that error, he didn't see the double yellow. Well, you must have been aware. The team did warn him that there were yellows in play. It was his teammate that had gone off. We know from what we've seen in Austria and again at the weekend, there are visible signs that a car is off in front of you, and he just failed to slow down, and it cost him really badly. He ended up starting last when he should have been starting, in P15. So yeah, sorry George, that's why your scores have come down. And then moving on to Latifi. I've given him, it's probably, again, maybe I've been a bit harsh on the TV here, and apologies for that, but I thought, it was his spin that ultimately cost the team. It triggers the whole thing. It's a bit like Bottas at the first Grand Prix in Austria. It's his error that has a knock-on effect for the rest of the team. But I really did enjoy his race. Again, very strong Latifi, like Russell in the race. But a move on the outside of Raikkonen to Stowe that he called his first real legit Formula One overtake.
Okay, so it's an 8 for George and a 7 for Latifi. Pretty decent points haul for Williams, in our rankings anyway. Racing Point, right, yes, where were they? I mean, obviously, let's start with the man of the weekend, Nico Hülkenberg. Amazing return to Formula One at the final hour. Absolutely heartbreaking that all of that time and effort and the late nights and the early mornings to get him into that car, and then DNS.
Yeah, it's almost like Hülkenberg bingo, isn't it? He's just had so much unfortunate luck in his career. The only cliche that was missing for Hülkenberg was him crashing out in Baku when a podium was on, because he kept doing that earlier on in his career. But yeah, so unfortunate. A clutch bolt shearing when they fired up the car cost him starting the race. And sadly, we do have a rule at Autosport, whereas if something like this happens outside the driver's control, we have to give them a non-applicable, because it's just unfair to rate them on all of that. But yeah, brilliant. I thought really brilliant for Hülkenberg, considering everything that he'd been through. Like, he was locked out of the paddock effectively until just a few minutes before FP1 as he awaited the results of his coronavirus test. Seemed pretty good. You can't really just jump into any Formula One car and be right at the limit right at the moment. He's missed all of testing. It's a new setup. Yeah, he knows the team, but it's a new arrangement for the car, and he's not going to be able to get to the limit. So I thought he did pretty well in qualifying. But yeah, should we come on to Lance Stroll, because I've got a lot of things to say about him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading this, Alex, and you've given him a 4, which is quite a harsh score. But based on the pace that we know that Racing Point has, not really where we expected him to finish, was it?
No, not at all. And when you consider what happened at the front with the tyre failures and Mercedes effectively losing a podium, they gave away a podium this weekend because of what happened with their tyres. This is where Racing Point should absolutely be being on the podium. These exact scenario. He needs to be in that position to capitalise when something goes wrong. And frankly, in qualifying, he should be bothering Verstappen. He was nowhere in qualifying. Got beaten by, considering the pace of the car that is, got beaten by Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari that we know is so terrible. It's just not good for Stroll. And then he went backwards in the race. It was damning on Stroll there. Sorry.
Right, the team we're coming on to next and the driver we're coming on to next, I think is maybe deserving of at least a nod for driver of the day. And that's Pierre Gasly, who I think I'm going to agree with you, Alex, here, has got a 10 out of 10 in these rankings. He just seems to come alive in that AlphaTauri Toro Rosso. It suits him so much better. And what a different start to the season compared to last season.
Absolutely. I mean, he's been one of the stars of the season so far. I don't think you can deny that. Okay, he's not on TV so much, but he's been brilliant in qualifying and he's been brilliant in the races. He's had some unfortunate, reliability issues as well. 10 out of 10 for Gasly. I couldn't really fault him. He only misses out on a third consecutive Q3 appearance because Stroll set his identical lap time first. So by the rules, Stroll has to go through. And that And that AlphaTauri, it actually, it's on the verge of Q3 every time. There are much faster cars ahead of it, so he's doing a really, really good job, even to get it into P11, I think. And then brilliant in the race. He got past Stroll. He avenged himself as in the final order, and his move on Vettel was absolutely brilliant. It hangs on around the outsiders though. Yeah, he's edged off the track, but Vettel doesn't leave him anywhere to go. So the stewards noted it and said, actually, no investigation necessary. Stuck it down the inside on a 4 times world champion. And yeah, I thought that was brilliant for Gasly. And there were other drivers ahead of him towards the end of the race that were being warned. Gasly's coming. So fantastic performance from him.
I love it. It's a bit of a redemption moment. Obviously, I'm sure he would rather be up there in the super competitive teams, but the team environment and the team situation can often overshadow actually the skills of a driver, and putting them back in a kind of a midfield team allows them to kind of show what they've got. So I'm really glad that Gasly's getting as you said, it's not like the main spotlight, but he deserves a note, and watch out where he's going to finish this season, because I think he's going to have a really strong season based on what he's done already. Daniel Kvyat, was the problem that he had found to be a kind of foreshadowing of what was to come in the final closing laps? Because he had a tyre failure, right?
I think it's a little bit too early to say on that, Jess, because Pirelli's conducting what they call a 360-degree investigation, which, as one of my colleagues pointed out, is pretty good because tyres are 360-degree shaped. But yeah, it did look like, I know it was picked up by some of the commentators and on TV, it did look like he had a puncture. Like if you do look like frame by frame, it looks like something goes wrong with the car, and that's what pitches him off. I mean, he was 100% blaming himself initially, pushing the camera out of the way, a bit naughty there. But you can't really blame a guy who's just had a massive accident for not wanting a camera shoved in his face. That's probably fair. But yeah, he then comes back to the paddock and says, no, it was just my fault. It was nothing at all about that. And then a press release later on, they're saying, actually, now we've looked at the data, yes, something did go wrong on the car, so we have to take them at the word there. Yeah, 7 for Kvyat because he was off the pace of Gasly in qualifying, not by much, it must be said, and he did make a good start as well. But yeah, I thought a 7 was a pretty fair reflection of his weekend.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree. Let's move on to McLaren, who again had a pretty strong performance and looked like they were going to get kind of a lot of lovely points in the bag if it hadn't been for Carlos Sainz's tyre issues in the closing stages, which was a bit of a heartbreak to see because he was running so well. So we've got Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz both on 8s. Sainz really capitalised on the start and went flying, and Norris dropped back a little bit. Still with his elbows out, but still dropped back.
Yeah, I think last time out in Hungary, he was one of those drivers that was just caught out in the wet, their first sort of Formula 1 start in the wet, and it really went wrong for them. This one, he makes an okay getaway from the line. It's just further on in the lap, he makes quite a key mistake when he's coming into Brooklands, locks up, runs very, very wide. Actually, it really harms Stroll's progress at that point because he sort of blocks him off at the edge of the track as he's trying to get wide. That's what allows Sainz to get through, and in the end, ultimately, that's what allows Daniel Ricciardo to get a run out of Luffield and down the old pit straight and into Copse. It was an easier move than it actually looked at first glance on TV for Ricciardo there. But yeah, the reason why I thought Norris and Sainz couldn't be separated in terms of their points was because Norris was just superb in qualifying. Beats a Racing Point. Okay, yeah, Lance Stroll was having one of his days, but that's a great performance from Norris, and it was just great to hear him say, actually, because he nearly got knocked out in Q1. He was like, I was overdriving, I was overthinking it. The wind was a massive factor. He just calmed it all down and delivered fantastically for McLaren in qualifying, and then was still running strongly in the race even after that early mistake, lost him a couple of spots. But Sainz, it came alive in the race for him. I mean, it'd been really interesting to see what would have happened had Grosjean not got in amongst it and stopped him getting up to Charles Leclerc at the sort of the restart for the second safety car. He was so unlucky with the puncture. Like I said, Pirelli are going to be looking at all of it. As we'll come on to later, there's suspicion that debris played a real part in this. But yeah, I thought considering where they both shone over the weekend, that equal 8s was all right for McLaren.
Now we've got another driver coming up with a perfect score, and maybe surprisingly, that driver is in a Ferrari. But unsurprisingly, Charles Leclerc drove another really, really. I mean, it's not standout in the fact that he was, overtaking left, right and centre. He had quite a quiet race for the most of the race, but he has put that Ferrari on the podium again, much to everybody's shock. Yeah,
I mean, I actually thought it was quite a low-key weekend until Q3 for Leclerc. Like, he was doing absolutely fine, But his qualifying performance, he nearly beats Verstappen to third place in a Ferrari that we know is so terrible this year. Fantastic for him there. And then in the race, yeah, he was fortunate that with the Grosjean Haas strategy puts a car in between Leclerc and Sainz, and that allows Leclerc to get a bit of a gap, because he actually really struggles at the second safety car restart for tyre warm-up. He said in the press conference he was all over the place, had to wait for the tyres to come to him. So lucky that Grosjean was behind, and and he could get away. But after that, he still showed really, really strong pace. And on Friday, when we did the long run analysis, when we looked at the averages, it looked like Ferrari were going to plummet from wherever they qualified. So that's why he really does deserve a 10, even if he doesn't get on the podium. I think that drive deserves a 10. So yeah, fantastic for Charles Leclerc. It's a bit like the opening race in Austria, where Leclerc finishes on the podium and Vettel's all at sea and nowhere. Okay, in this race he doesn't have a big gaff, against like Sainz like he did. He was just saying, I've got no confidence in the car again, which was a big feature of that Austria race. And it then later transpired that there was a minor issue with the car. Now, unfortunately, with the driver rankings, with the deadline for the magazine and everything, we have to just go on all the information that is available, into the early hours of Monday morning. So it may come out that there was a car problem, but he's still getting outclassed by Leclerc in qualifying. Leclerc was way up when Vettel was way down, and he makes a mistake and gets penalised by doing track limits at Copse, cost him a position to Ocon. He would only have been ninth when Leclerc was fourth. That wasn't a good performance from Vettel in qualifying, and was pretty average in the race. He made another mistake on the first lap again with Ocon going wide there. But yeah, at least it ended on a positive note with him defying Bottas.
Now, a team that had its best performance of the season so far is Renault, and we've got Daniel Ricciardo on another 10 out of 10, Alex.
I know, yeah. I had to message my editor Kevin Turner, being like, I've got quite a lot of 10s here, we chatted about it, and really, Daniel Ricciardo, you can't fault him. He did brilliantly. Ends up fourth. Again, fortunate at the end that a couple of cars dropped out, but he did the maximum, and by our rating system, he deserves it for what he did. Also, in qualifying, he's brilliant. Beats a faster Ferrari, because we know the Ferrari's faster ultimately than the Renault. He beats a Red Bull. And he beats a Racing Point. Yeah, okay, Hülkenberg was, in the car, so maybe not, it's not being driven to its ultimate potential that perhaps Perez might have taken it to. But he was just relentless in the race. Actually, got really, really close to Leclerc at the end. So he was really close to a podium. I thought very impressive from Ricciardo. Coming on to Ocon, again, didn't do a lot wrong either. But yeah, he loses out on his score because he was beaten in both qualifying and the race. He had looked actually to be the fastest Renault driver in Q1 and Q2. And then things just a bit like Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas, things turn around in Q3. But nevertheless, a good performance from Ocon. I mean, it's been a bit patchy to start his season, but yeah, I was impressed with him yesterday.
Definitely a marked improvement on Ocon's side, which is good to see, because again, he's one of those drivers that you kind of know the potential's there, but it just kind of falls away a little bit, or things happen, or the car's not working quite to his preferences, and it makes him look bad. But is it him looking bad, or is it, this is the problem with Formula One. And as we're going to come on to in Red Bull, which we're moving on to, when will the rhetoric of is Alex Albon out of Red Bull going to end?
It's so tough for him, because that car looks an absolute nightmare at times. We saw it in testing. We saw it at several races so far. He had a big crash in FP2 when it was just like, I don't really know what happened. The rear just went away. The balance all over the place. Red Bull have come out and said, we need to give him a better balanced car. It just looks fundamentally like those aero anomalies are creating real difficulties for the drivers. And because Max Verstappen is a superstar, he seems to be able to cope with it better. I'm not saying Alex Albon is a bad driver. Far from that. He's a very, very good driver. But I think as we all know, Verstappen is future world champion material, and probably ultimately multiple world champion material. But at the same time, Alex did make some key mistakes here. Something went wrong in that crash in FP2. He gets knocked out in Q2 again. Yeah, I know, extreme circumstances, because he missed a lot of FP3 because of an energy store issue. But still, that car is ultimately the second fastest car on the grid. I think it's a smidge ahead of the Racing Point, if you were in like laboratory conditions, as it were. And then the crash with Magnussen. Yeah, again, like I said, 50-50, but it's a little bit like, a few occasions, like in Austria. Did he really need to go for that move on Lewis Hamilton when he did, considering he had a tyre advantage? it just felt a bit like, I totally see what you tried to do. You saw a gap, you went for it, but then you backed out at the last second, and you might have just waited because that Haas would have been easy prey in the following corners. So yeah, 5 for Albon. I don't feel good about giving it to him there, because he's a really nice guy. I covered him in Formula 2, really good bloke, but just it does need to get better from him, but also the team needs to step up as well.
Quite interesting that the team has come out and said, like, we need to give you a better car. It's quite a big statement from Red Bull, because they don't usually say that about their drivers. They're usually quite, cutthroat, as we've seen last year with Gasly. But yeah, I think, and on my side, it's like, it's Magnussen. Like, I know, you shouldn't just let a driver bully you, or a driver's reputation bully you off the track, but and maybe that's just going to come with experience and having a bit more of a level head. But yeah, it's just, I just want Alex to catch a break. Come on, Alex, like, we all believe in you. You can get there. His teammate, on the other hand, has got a 10 out of 10 again. We've got, again, as you said, a lot of 10 out of 10s, and Max Verstappen is one of them. Again, like, he just seems to, he's just getting what he can and more. They did not expect to get P2, and yeah, okay, that was because of tyres. But boy, did they maximise on it, not to use a pun, but boy, did they just got everything they needed to get. They absolutely capitalised on the situation, brought it home in P2. But Max Verstappen, 10 out of 10, Alex. I'll stop talking now.
He is a driver who's over-delivering with that car. He got so close to the Mercedes drivers. Actually, probably that's the wrong way of looking at it. He stayed so close to the Mercedes drivers, because if you look on TV, or you sort of look at the race on paper, he was gone. He was nowhere. He was comprehensively beaten. Well, actually, to only get to 10 seconds behind at basically the end of the race before the tyres blow out, I think that's still pretty impressive, considering how good that Mercedes car is. Now, with Max in the race, it was really interesting being in the media centre at Silverstone, because there's a tool that you didn't have on the sort of media portal that's set up at home, which you can see where the cars are in a sort of a line representation of the lap, and the Mercedes are up here, he's just a chunk back, then there's a massive gap to Leclerc, a little bit of another gap to the rest, and then that's it. He stayed with them, and I thought that was so impressive. And again, brilliant in qualifying. He was so in control. He even had time to mock his engineer, it seemed, on the radio.
As you said, the team that was kind of basically so in control, it was getting quite dull, was the Mercedes team, and we can't fault them. They've built a perfect car. They've got 2 great drivers. They've just maximised on everything, not to use maximise again. But they don't have perfect scores, do they, Alex? We've given Lewis Hamilton a 9 and Valtteri Bottas an 8.
Yeah, they don't have perfect scores, and I think this is going to be the sort of the controversial one, particularly with Lewis Hamilton. But he caused a red flag in qualifying. It was a pretty big mistake that could have had some really, severe ramifications for the rest of his weekend, and he was quite fortunate to get away with it in a way. Also, Bottas wasn't that far off him in the race. Bottas kept him really, really, really honest, and that ultimately contributes to Bottas's tyre exploding. He was 1 or 2 seconds behind. He wasn't going for an overtake every lap. But he's stuck in that position where whatever he does at that point, if he pushes his tyres harder on a race that was incredibly tough on tyres, because they'd all come in that little bit too early. They came in about 5 laps before Pirelli told them, it was the ultimate point to stop. Get rid of your mediums, your softs, and go on to the hard, or what the hard could do to get to the end of the race. So they were always up against it. And in Bottas's case, if he pushed, he'd wreck his tyres that little bit more. And he's in the dirty air, so he's sliding. So that's wrecking his tyres at the same time. And Hamilton didn't edge away quite as quickly. It does get to a point where he does do that because Bottas's tyres are gone. So that's the reason. I mean, I'm hamstrung quite a bit by the fact we don't do decimal places, because this would be a 9.9. Like, it's so close to a 10. It's just not perfect from Hamilton, especially when we consider how perfect, he is effectively.
I mean, he was lucky in that the sidewalls of those tyres didn't explode and shred and spread debris everywhere, which I think is why a lot of people are saying, no, he was totally out of order. He should have parked that car. He should have gone into the pits. He can't finish the race on three tyres. Like, that's not legal. But I mean, he didn't cause a massive issue, did he? But
I mean, I assume those people were also complaining about Sergio Perez going to the flag in Austria with his front wing off, because I mean that argument's ridiculous, frankly. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, he said he was cool as a cucumber, but you listen to him on the radio afterwards. He was like,
"Shit,
wow, that was." I mean, he's
sorry,
like, it's so close. He did, he does.
Ed's gonna have to beep that one. Sorry, Ed.
A real beep, because I know we add in fake beeps for the social media promo. But yeah, he does. He swears on the radio because you tell how hard he's pushing. But yeah, honestly, my take on it. Looking at the lap times, looking at everything that they said afterwards, I think Bottas kept him more honest than it looked, and that Mercedes were also that little bit not in complete control than they looked. Okay, yeah, the power modes were slightly turned down. Toto Wolff said, we can't keep them in the spicy power modes, as he put it, for the whole race. But it still ultimately came to the end. Got to the end, and it all went so very nearly very, very wrong. Bottas, I gave him an 8 because he just couldn't get ahead of Hamilton. He really tried. I think he really pushed him, but it was that swinging qualifying that really did for him. Didn't get pole position when he looked like he was, he was on for it, and also doesn't get Vettel at the end, despite the incredible pace of the Mercedes car. That was a bit weird. Like that's why he gets an 8.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you don't agree with any of our rankings, head on over to autosport.com, where we will give the power back to you, and you can tell us what you think by using our little widget over on the driver rankings story. Make sure you leave us a comment below as well. Let us know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? Usually you guys disagree, but we love to read your comments anyway. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's going to be tons of stuff coming out over the next few weeks because we have another race at Silverstone. So you're going to be going back. You're going home now, Alex, but you're going to be returning on Thursday to do it all again.
Yeah, got to stay with the code of conduct from the FIA. Make sure I don't see anyone. PPE wherever I go. Hopefully with another negative COVID test, then it should all be back in action next weekend.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll see you there, Alex. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.